Welcome to the BEI podcast. I'm Lutricia. You know, there's been a lot of talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Instead, we're going to focus on BEI, bigotry, exclusion, and ignorance. Our country has been plagued with it since it was founded. Qualified citizens are denied leadership, silenced, labeled incompetent, all because of who they are or what they look like. We ask, what does it mean to be qualified, and who decides? How do we determine who gets to participate in the American experiment? Can we live up to the principles of our democracy, liberty, and justice for all? So, Emily, first of all, I want to thank you for being willing to have this conversation with me as a part of our podcast. And you and I have known each other for a while. And what I know about you is I know mostly your activism, but you and I both are licensed social workers. You think of yourself as an art therapist, and I've seen your work and I understand why you see that yourself that way. But you've also led voter registration campaigns. You've done a lot of activist work. And one of the things that you've done is you've developed Sister Scene, as you say, which is something that I think you founded, even though it was out of a connection between your daughter and another of her friends, one of her very good friends, who was a soccer player, professional soccer player. So I appreciate your work and what you've done and how you still continue to do so. You and I have talked a lot about the role of women in society. We've talked a lot about, we share the belief that if any significant change is going to happen, women will do it. You have worked very hard to bring women of color and white women together in Sister Scene. You know, that work is powerful work that is definitely a contribution to the societal change that we both believe in. So I'm appreciating that. The conversation we had yesterday that I've been thinking about is the idea that all women need to work together to bring social change. Where you and I were talking yesterday is the relationship of white women to women of color. And is there the kind of synergy that enables us as women from all of our backgrounds to come together? So, what I'm interested in, the first thing I want to ask you is about how you see your identity as a white woman and how you came to it.
Thank you. I really appreciate you, Lutricia, and I never get asked that question. It's so important for women and girls to be able to describe who they are. That's what our identity is fundamentally. And it's not a flat, simple, easy answer. But for me, my sense of who I am has gone through a lot of clarification and discernment processes that started in early childhood in Louisiana. And it very much is congruent with the work that I've come to and the reason why I was able to meet someone who I see as a powerful leader for change for American women, women in America. You, along with a lot of other women in the last 20 years, especially 25 years. Well, it's really, I can't believe it's been 30 years since I've been in Durham. And I'm so glad. I learned a lot in Louisiana, but I describe my identity as female, culturally impacted by French Louisiana heritage, also spiritually impacted by Catholic heritage. And those are all things that I've grown deeper into understanding why they're relevant. And for the purpose of today, it's very important for me to let people know I have come to some aha moments about my family heritage that I think are useful for the whole conversation for women as leaders. And that is that not only is my mom a powerful, person who died, and I'm grieving from a few years ago, and she was an artist and she was creative, but my dad's side of the family I have a great uncle who is one of the most relevant, I'll just use the term with quotes, bad guys in American history by virtue of his name and deed. Sheriff Leonard Resweber's. Sheriffs in the United States have a tremendous amount of power in a different way than the police do. But my great uncle in St. Martinville, Louisiana, has his name on a Supreme Court case that from the late 1930s was the, I don't know the legal word, but the big milestone case about the death penalty. And he was all the way in Washington, D.C., before the U.S. Supreme Court, defending and asking and pleading for the right to execute a teenage boy, Willie Francis, a Black teenage boy who had a developmental learning issue and who was completely innocent, not unlike a lot of the stories that we're hearing about today. The reason why that story is so relevant, which I didn't grow up in St. Martinville, I wasn't hearing about that. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, but my dad, just 30 years later, went to the Supreme Court to fight for the rights of single mothers of children who don't have access to property because men have ownership, usually always on paper. And that was a Black family. And he actually argued before Thurgood Marshall. So I am very much, as a white person in this country that is being torn asunder by the white male patriarchy and our white male dominant and also oppressive, violent, penchant, sexually violent penchant government system, economic system, school system. And I didn't understand that. And no one ever put these things together for us in our family stories. So I identify as an anti-racist. A lot of people don't know what that means, but it's not just that I reject racism. I understand I'm complicit and I benefit from racism. And I actively own that I'm an anti-racist. I'm also a feminist, but most of all, I'm a multiculturalist. So that is because it fits perfectly with trying to understand the complexity of having a white family with an evil doer, a sheriff who in the international news was in the newspaper for an execution that had gone wrong in Louisiana of a teenage boy, fighting to get the right to reinstitute the execution process. It makes me choke to say it out loud, but that's reality. And that's what white women have to come to terms with. And in the sister scene and with you in our conversations as people who are concerned about voting rights and women's rights, we have to become more comfortable actually understanding and knowing what our personal history is and what it means to us.
I think this is a place, though, and I would have thoroughly agreed with your position about women of color and white women coming together and hearing stories. But this last election has led me to rethink or at least question, as a general rule or pattern, white women's understanding of oppression and white women's understanding of oppression as it relates to people of color and particularly Black women. I used to think that white women recognize their oppression in the same way that Black people recognize their oppression. But I don't know that that's true. I think white women experience themselves as being treated unfairly, but I don't know that they see themselves as being oppressed in the way that Black women and women of color understand it. And that then, for me, the question I have is, what does our coalition look like then if we are not understanding the same problem? And our stories, Sister Scene, and the work I do and everybody has our own are designed to address that and to create more possibilities for women to come together. But I do think that I actually think, quite frankly, I want to hear this from you, your opinion about this. I actually think that women, progressive, feminist women who identify as white, should be talking to other white women. And that is a more effective use of their time.
Right. I mean, I
White
understand the
women,
distinction. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that's my question, which is, if we believe that women, as a generally speaking, will lead us out of this sort of this fascist, authoritarian, patriarchal, white supremacist context that we tend to be operating in, then it seems to me that women have to understand each other and understand each other's stories. And I want to ask you this. I think one of the things that white women have to do, as a practical matter, generally speaking,
Mm-hmm.
is what you just did, which is to own their complicity in maintaining the white patriarchal system. And we tend to think about that as we think about the white supremacy in terms of white men, but white women have been participating actively and in some ways been complicit. And so it seems to me that that is one of the primary things we need to address. We need to understand. So I appreciate the work you did with yourself, because you seem to have done the work of saying, I need to understand I've got this in my family and I've got this in my family. Well, who am I and what do I believe in and what are my values? And I think that it is a rare circumstance that anybody does that. But I also think it's a rare circumstance that white women undertake that or take that on.
Yes. I think it is very important for women as a whole in order to feel the strength and power that we have as humans to understand how we're different from and how we're similar to the people that we
Mm-hmm.
come from. And that's very hard in families in all cultures where secrecy and a kind of scrutiny that tries to say to women and girls that you need to be, walk in a certain way and talk in a certain way so that you don't get harassed or raped. That's happening in all of our families. Or we just have to play and be perfect. But white women in particular feel, I understand what you're saying, have been pretending that it's okay to make the meal in the kitchen when the white men are meeting in the other room about going down the street to intimidate people or writing a bill to crush the hopes and dreams and the potential of other people. So our liberation is similar as women, but for white women in particular, we have been responsible for the infrastructure, the home, the vote, because there's more of us in number. If we're being passive and we are choosing not to speak up and to reject and not participate. That is what complicity is. So I think part of the problem, it's really necessary to understand if you're part of American society, the concept of oppression. And it's important to understand as Americans, really all of us, that Indigenous people were crushed, manipulated, imprisoned, put in, schools to be brainwashed, and still mistreated in ways that are ungodly and inhumane. And that Black people were then brought and kidnapped, raped, and refused access to education so that all the beautiful languages and cultures of the multitudes of tribes that were brought here were being washed away and shamed and made into a covert secret system. Those actions that white America was actually consciously on purpose, the government system, the police system, the school system, our Constitution was created in such a way so that white male owners could maintain white male ownership. And it was completely dishonest that we were a revolutionary culture rejecting England. England is the home of separating people, putting them in poorhouses, not feeding people on purpose. And we decided to replicate the British as an official kind of white society that was small at the beginning, but we magnified and grew as white people because of thousands and thousands and thousands of Black people who were intentionally being put to work to build the infrastructure for us to survive, and actually being raped so that we could make more children that were multiracial. And we were not developing an attachment to the beauty of different white cultures in Europe, or the fact that our European heritage is directly related to the heritage of the African people. We were wiping that all out and whitewashing it. So Black women have gotten taught by their families that we have a very special, beautiful culture about being Black. And white women have been taught, you're girls and you're women and you're white, and it doesn't have a special quality for you except that you're dominant and you're superior to poorer people or women of color. So I agree. These are the kinds of conversations intentionally that everybody is our own community and sister scene community are bringing women into. And the reason why I believe that white women benefit from not just doing it by themselves with white women is that there is so much of a deficit of comfort talking about the beauty of any kind of culture. We don't really understand what our culture is at all.
Yeah, I hear that, but I don't know that that's in this current, again, I want to check this out with you. In the
Okay.
current situation that we're in, I don't know that the conversation is about our multicultural experience.
Okay.
I think our conversation is about white women understanding, because, well, let me ask it this way. I think one of the other things that happens in a white patriarchal society with white women is that they get privileges. There are benefits that come from being in that kind of situation where there's this, you have access to privilege. You grew up in a privileged life. And I think the choice and the decision that white women have to make, which is really a difficult one, and I don't know if I could make it, which is, do I abandon or reject this privilege and all these goodies that I'm getting in order to chart a course of resistance to it that leaves me out cold and leaves me without? So, do I accept the privilege? Do you reject the privilege and fight against the patriarchy and oppression and all the things that oppression brings? And that, I think, is a tough decision for white women. And I understand it. I mean, Black women got to where we are in terms of, you talk about us as being further ahead, is because we didn't have access to privilege. We had to figure this out. We had to understand where our agency is. We had to pull ourselves together as a community. We had to find our own collective power and our own agency. And Black women did not have the benefit of privilege to fall back on. And honestly, if I had been raised or born in a situation where I was totally privileged and secure materially, what would I do in that circumstance? We ask white women to do a lot. We ask white women to leave these or to resist white men and white patriarchy, when in fact it's white women that brought that white men into the world. They're their sons, their husbands, their fathers, and we're saying we want you to sort of resist that and come over here with us and fight, a justice movement and create a social justice movement. I think it's asking white women to do a lot.
It is.
And I don't think that we have yet, I think we're trying to do this with Sister Scene in particular, that help white women figure out a way to excuse themselves from the patriarchy in order to create a better life. So we don't have a vision for what this world would look like if we did this social change.
Yeah.
And it's not, we haven't articulated it. I think you have an idea. I think I have an idea, but articulated captures the imagination of women and other people. I don't know that we've done that. So what are we asking women to do?
It's not ironic because every step of the way, the white patriarchy, the white power movement, even people that are not considering themselves part of or having anything to do with white power. In the end, we have to be able to look at society and look at our families and look at ourselves as individuals in a lens where we're wondering, how much power do I have on a daily basis? And literally having a credit card, having a roof over one's head, having the ability to order something on the internet, it is a form of power. It's not just quote unquote convenience. It's complex on multi levels. I agree. For women to question their privilege when it's not in their best interest as far as their comfort, their creature comforts, or maintaining their status quo
The status. Yeah.
and their status. So, yes, it's quite remarkable that my dad was inspired negatively at the age of 12 by this sheriff who was his uncle. And my dad was in a very poor family. Many, many white people have experiences of deep poverty through their family history. And I know that you understand that fully, but it was through the university system that was built on the backs, literally built with the hands of enslaved people. Even our land grant universities, our state universities, Louisiana State, UNC, the North Carolina university system, some beautiful multicultural and cultural learning campuses around the world, but in the United States specifically, were built through the power of the purse, the government purse, and intentionally blocking out people of color as well as women, but really, especially the people of color were the people building it and not getting access to scholarships. And it took a long time, and it was a very separate movement with infighting among women, white women, and women of color to get us to the point where we even had the right to vote in this country.
Yeah, I think women should have their own agency about how they want to live their lives.
Yeah.
So I do not want to criticize or blame or judge those women who say, you know what, I'm staying at home. I'm going to respect the authority of my husband, and I'm just not going to go there. my question is, in making the decisions we make as women, are we making it fully informed about our own best interest and what works for us? Or are we being driven by some patriarchal notions that we've been fed for over and over again, like you say, about who we are and what our role is in this society? So if I'm functioning with my full agency capacity to decide, and I decide, you know what, I really do want to be in this system where I submit my leadership to my husband, to me, that's a choice a woman can make. The question I'm asking though is, to what extent do white women experience that today? That they are making decisions based on their own understanding of what is best for them.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm just curious about it because I'm a feminist like you, and I read about the Pankhurst sisters in England who started the feminist movement. I read about Betty Friedan and Alice Paul who fought for the right to vote. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and all, these feminists, actually Sojourner Truth and
Right.
even Harriet, they were feminists acting out of their own authority about themselves and understanding about themselves as human beings. So I'm trying to ask myself, did the 53% of women that voted for Donald Trump, how was that decision made for them or, for themselves? Now, I think somebody would say, shut up, Lutricia. They voted for the guy. They voted for the guy they wanted. Just accept that. And I'm having trouble accepting that 53% of white women would vote for Donald Trump in the face of everything he has done to hold back the progress of women, in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Everything he's done. So I'm having trouble believing that 53% of women did that with full knowledge and capacity. And it may be insulting for me to even think about that. It may be insulting for me to assume that these women may not know what they're doing, and I will accept that. But if it is true that they did know what they were doing, you see the problem that we have. Because 53% of white women obviously believe whatever his ideology is. And that's the stuff I'm trying to square.
I would love to, yes, for us to riff on the concept of ideology, how it relates to agency, how these ideas, one way that I taught my children, and this is part of being a liberated human. It's different. I taught my son it's going to be different for you because you're white and you're a boy. So you're going to get privileges. I literally was teaching this to my children when they were small enough and big enough. But there's ways to do that without the language about fairness and about oppression. But in the arts, I feel like we get access to these concepts that you're describing that are mind blowing. How could people who are not murderers and racists, people who would never do the kind of, I wanted to say rapists, frankly, rapists and bigots, because Donald Trump has been out on camera way before he was elected over and over. And everybody in America has access to these truths that women are objects for him to manipulate
Yeah.
and overpower, and that poor people are there for us to use. He has very many projects in the history of his business in New
And
York City.
that poor people are people who are poor because they are basically inadequate and it's their own fault. So therefore,
They deserve
yeah,
it. Yes.
they
And
deserve it.
again, those come from very deep ideologies that bubbled up over time as useful to be repeated. And it was very well specialized in British culture that the Americans have carried forward, that there are worthy people and unworthy people, and that even if we are God fearing, quote unquote, people who understand the difference between right and wrong and who aspire to follow, quote unquote, the golden rule, all the ways it's interpreted, even in music and poetry, that those people should not also accept that it's okay to give all of the money and the power to the guy who says that he is Jesus or that he can autograph Bibles. There's no culture in the United States of America that says that is okay. So, what I talked about with my kids when they were little, before all that story existed, was we have the benefit of an incredible imagination as human beings. And we have to be able sometimes to just get into a story and let go of reality. That lifts us up into a space that can be really deep and sorrowful, like the story of Despero, the tales of Despero, which all these stories are about oppressors and creatures and humans making choices to act. That's what agency is, to help each other or to just focus on themselves, and that it's perfectly natural for creatures to get narcissistic in certain situations, to forget about the people around them. But ultimately, the one we want to be free and to be safe and not be drowned or murder is the one that really cares about the little mouse with the really big ears that everybody makes fun of. That's truly who we are as Americans. We do have a compass. We have to be able to suspend disbelief. It's ironic. And also know what we believe. Suspending disbelief is where the sister scene lies. It is that we want women to trust their gut. Like, I know when I go into a conversation with Lutricia that it might get really exciting and really difficult because I've seen her talking to other people. But I'm not afraid of Lutricia because I feel her love and passion for the survival of the human race. And if I can't invite Lutricia to my house and Lutricia isn't comfortable to invite me to her house, we are perpetuating this separateness that people like Donald Trump, who are like story figures, who are overlords, landlords, people who are fake rich people. We have to be able to do that. How do we do that, Lutricia? It's difficult.
Well, what I hear you saying, which is really compelling, which is we have to be able to hear each other's stories. We have to develop an imagination for how we hear these stories. There are other metaphors and ways of thinking about our lives that we can share together. And I think all of that's right. I mean, I think all of that's, the conversations, the hearing of stories, because I think we touch each other's hearts when we see ourselves in each other, which is why my website is called Everybody as Our Own. We begin to see people as we see ourselves. What I am concerned about, though, Emily, is that white women were raised in a culture where they were simply not taught to see Black people as they see themselves. They simply were not taught that. When they came on, I'm thinking about, we had slavery. I mean, the first Africans showed up in 1619.
Mm-hmm.
So about 400 years, we've had a system in which a group of people have been labeled and denigrated and enslaved and mistreated and raped and abused and 3/5 of a human being, and that white people, white babies, white women were raised to believe that and see that. And it takes a powerful interruption to shift that mental model. And your question, like, okay, what is that powerful interruption? that shifts that mental model. What
Yeah.
is that?
That's beautiful the way you just described it as a yes.
But you have worked hard to make sure that women of color and white women come together, be together, read together, go to plays, soccer matches, all of this to make sure that we are at literally almost creating an alternate culture. If you ask me, what do we do? I say we began to get serious about creating a new paradigm. We are not, this paradigm right now is not going to work
Hmm.
for the kind of culture in the country we believe. It won't, our country won't survive this kind of fascism. So our multicultural democracy cannot survive.
Hmm.
So we have to think about how do we behave and relate to each other so that we can live out in our everyday lives the kind of world we believe in. How do we do that? So part
Yeah.
of it is sister scene. Part of it is everybody has our own. But the other part of it is that white women becoming very clear about who they are and then who they are to everybody else, to every other woman. And so if white women get clear about who they are in themselves and are willing to take a look at the life experience and what's happening to other women and to feel for them, to feel for the suffering of women of color and poor women, to feel for them. And by the way, thank you for reminding me that white women, there are plenty of white women who are not privileged. But even those white women resist joining, a movement for social justice because they see themselves as white and see
Hmm.
that that's the benefit. So for me, it's how do we create this new paradigm that and live in it and be a model for it so that we are capturing people's imagination. We can live like this. We can live and not be afraid. We can live and benefit from each other's talent and each other's knowledge. That there's a benefit and a gift from people of color and white people living together and loving together and growing together and producing together. And I think this is where I get back to the only people I see being able to do that are women.
Yeah. We are the ones. And it has to be an intentional invitation. It's not just informal. I think that is what the problem is. It does not bubble up naturally for
No.
white women and black women, and that includes queer women. So we're asking people up front when we meet people out in the community. If you and I were at a play and somebody came up, this will happen to us. Wow, I saw y'all talking. And that's the kind of feelings that I'm feeling. It happens a lot. And how did y'all get to know each other? And
Yeah.
we will say to people, you know what? It's on purpose because we think that white women and black women, and we've asked people and they agreed with it, they tend to go somewhere in public with their next door neighbor, someone they know that they work with, someone who goes to their church, someone who is part of their family, extended family. We feel like we're kind of accidentally perpetuating segregation socially. And we're asking people, if you don't embrace racism and you don't embrace homophobia and you don't embrace that men are better than women, and women are going, hell yeah. I mean, everyone we're meeting, then we want to invite you because we don't usually go to each other's houses. We might sit together at a soccer match. And I learned that growing up as a white mom in a very cool, very contemporary Durham, that the white women were still sitting together on the bleachers. And my daughter noticed it when she and Brianna were in high school at a very, very progressive high school, Jordan High School, where there's plenty of niches and ways for kids to hang out with each other in a multicultural way. Once they went to lunch, they broke out into separate groups.
Yeah.
And so Brianna, right now, you can check out a lot of different places where she's traveling to talk to people because she has a microphone as a professional athlete. She is making sure, as an athlete, she doesn't just talk about how awesome soccer is and how she learned from her parents and brothers and blah, blah, blah. And she went to great schools, blah, blah, blah. No, one of her first things to say will be, diversity matters to her family. That's what I was going to say earlier. There's an irony that we don't talk about bigotry and bullying, right? Exclusion, ignorance. We have so many taboo words in American conversations. And all of us, white women and Black women, when we're actually in each other's presence, need to have permission to say, I know that I'm ignorant about such and such, and it's not your job to teach me. But you know what? We both love mysteries. So, and there's a play coming up that's a mystery, and I don't have anybody to go with. My husband doesn't like mysteries. So let's ask the theater. You know what? I call up the theater and I'm like, I know a bunch of women that want to come, and they're multicultural and they're committed anti racists and they're anti homophobia, and they'll give us 10 tickets.
All right.
Yeah.
But I also think to be more strategic about it, though. I mean, I think the reason I do this podcast is because it was obvious to me that we had allowed the conservative right wing sort of racist group, and I'm not saying everybody that's conservative is I'm not calling that,
Yeah.
but we've allowed the racism and the homophobia and the misogyny to have a platform on social media, and it's a big platform. And we have not had a platform that would respond to that. So when I kept hearing about diversity and equity and inclusion being a problem, I'm thinking, well, what about bigotry, exclusion, and ignorance? And so we need strategically, we need as much platform to tell our story and to promote our ideas and our ideology as much as they do, as much as the conservatives do. And
We have
so,
to
yeah,
take that space. We have to claim space, and we need to do it happily, not begrudgingly. This is important work. And I am not ashamed as a white woman when I say that I have privileges. I'm not ashamed. There's no shame in
no,
speaking the truth. I have a lot of different opportunities in my everyday life to ask questions about my privilege, just to be curious and interrogate, do a little bit of research on the internet, ask my neighbor, ask someone who I respect, when I go on vacation.
in the sense that, I learned this as part of my work in the civil rights movement, and I'm still not sort of, very much impressed with the story of Durham, of the woman Ann Dunham, who
Mm-hmm.
literally converted this racist member of the Ku Klux Klan, and they were friends until the day he died. So I agree that the opportunity to come together and hear each other's stories and see each other differently and to connect is critical. Because unless, in my mind, unless we all women, but particularly white women, start asking ourselves the question, well, who are we to one another?
Yeah.
Does it mean why, how many, to white women, how many Black women do I know? And I know their stories and I connect to them and I relate to them. How many white women do I know and I know their stories and I connect to them and I relate to them and I see them as friends?
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that those questions are the questions that we should be asking ourselves about each other. And then the
That's,
next question, how do we begin to address the massive inequities that are happening to all women?
yes. Thank you. for putting that all together beautifully. And I do believe that we have to show up throughout the year, but especially the window, which is about 8 weeks before elections, when the big purse that our taxes make up, a really big purse for our parks and our roads and our schools and our infrastructure. We can't just be uninvolved and on the sidelines and then just show up and vote. That's excellent that we show up and vote. We have to understand that it's appropriate to trust people who we can trust. Women know who to trust, even if they're in a marriage with someone whose values they realize don't align with theirs. That's not the end of the world. We love people who we love. Everything can't line up perfectly and go smoothly for humans. But if we can talk more frankly about why being an anti bully, why being a feminist, why being an anti racist, or being for public schools and for, insurance for the elderly and for sick people and people who have disabilities, why that's so important to us. If we can just get a little bit comfortable, then we can talk to other people about that. We don't have to be comfortable with the term white supremacy, anti racist. We can just talk about poverty and inclusion.
Well, as a matter of fact, I don't use those terms so much anymore because for me, it is about a common experience that we're having around oppression and tyranny and fascism.
Yeah.
It's happening to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, you know, my identity where I recognize myself as a multicultural human being who believes in democracy and justice for everybody. So I'm trying to not make our path so narrow because it is about race and race is big. It's also about sexism and sexism is big. And what I'm coming to understand, Emily, there's all of those are like in a ball and they're all in this ball and it's knotted up and it's hard to pull one out and say this is it. We almost have a hybrid kind of oppression that includes race and gender and homophobia and sex and classism. It's a hybrid.
Love this too, especially because we exist commonly in this two-dimensional film and television world. We need to be able to use our hands and come up with a picture and also embrace the new words like it's a hybrid.
Yeah, and find a name for this hybrid
Well, I
that is not
love that everybody as our own. Here's a good little thing, a hand thing. Didn't you love the little hand jives that we learned when we were kids? Here's the church. How did it go? Here's the church.
church.
Here's the
Here's the
people. Steeple.
door.
Open the
Yeah,
door,
open the
and there's all the people. Well,
right.
that is us, but in us, it's actually part of being human beings. We have a system that is constantly labeling everything. Our left brain has to survive. Is it poisonous or not? And then our right brain has to say, but is it candy? Because if it's candy, it might be worth it. Because I love when I get to do that traditional Christmas candy thing. That's our collaborative side. We have to put it all together, but part of our brains is divisive, competitive.
Brain. Yeah, tends to be that way. Yeah.
So we have to be creative. And I think that's, yeah, if we can meet up in creative spaces. And for me, I don't have to be focused on reaching out to people who are in the white nationalist or the KKK extremist movement. For me, I believe if I reach out to women who I trust intuitively from all cultures and differences and say, I think you might be interested. We're going to have people over to my house on Sunday for a conversation, and then we're going to make a plan to go to a play or go to the pool, whatever you like, people like. Then we'll be more likely to actually do work for democracy weaving. We'll be doing it together instead of separately.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for this conversation. I think I learned something. I learned something from you hearing and participating in this. And I want to thank you for what you do, for your work, for your leadership, for our friendship. And at any point in our lives, you know this. Then the reason I'm interested in women finding their agency, because at any point in our lives, when we find our agency, we can take a step. And if we can keep taking steps, then we create a movement and we create change.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, Emily. I'm going to have you come back if you're willing, but thank you so much.
I appreciate you so much. All have to make connections around beauty because we are all suffering. It's not the same. But when we get together and make those beautiful connections, then we're stronger together. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily.
Take care.
Thank you for joining our podcast. Please visit our website, everybodyasourOwn.org, and join our monthly HEAR, HEAR, and NOW conversations. If you appreciate this content, please like and subscribe to us. It is deeply appreciated. See you next time.